Out of all the years that I've been producing and mixing professionally, I have seen this one major red flag appear in so many projects straight from the get-go, and to me, this can just kind of derail the entire project off the bat. And that red flag is actually handling file delivery. I get so many files every year that I need to mix or produce, and out of all the files that I get, maybe 15% are perfectly organized, perfectly labeled, and perfect quality. Maybe another 30 are completely workable, but there's some workarounds that I have to do. And then maybe another like 45 to 50% are just completely unusable. Maybe there's clipping in the audio, or they're not labeled, or they're not actually stems and multitracks. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to actually talk about how to prep your session if you're going to send it to a producer to collaborate with, or if you're going to send it to a mixing engineer for them to mix your project. Because most times that I get a project, it is not in the right condition to even start it right away. And so over the years, I've kind of developed a sheet that I'll hand to people that hire me so they can make sure that they have everything. But in this video, I want to make sure that if you're an artist, or if you're a producer, or if you're an engineer who's sending things out, you can get them to where the next person is going to be completely happy and they can jump into your project immediately. So we're going to dive in and check all of that out in 1 second. But before we do, my name is Austin. You're watching Make Pop Music. If you like this video, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. We have new videos like this every single Friday. And then other than that, if you want to support us after this, head over to our website, Make Pop Music. But let's dive in so I can actually show you how to prep some files for production and for mixing and not have the next engineer or producer be absolutely pissed off at you. So let's go ahead and let's dive in with the first most basic thing, and that is, what files are you delivering? Are you delivering stems, or are you delivering multi-tracks? I hear a lot of people use these terms interchangeably, but they are not quite the same thing. And once you get to a certain level of engineer or producer that you're hiring, they're going to know the difference. And when they ask for something specific, they mean that that is exactly what they want. So let me explain it. So let's talk about multi-tracks first, because if you're hiring a producer or if you're hiring a mix engineer, they're probably going to want multi-tracks. So multi-tracks are basically going to be individual tracks. So like kick, snare accents, short riser, respace, all these individual tracks right here. They're going to want those so then they can go in and they can rebalance things. They can go in and they can process things on an individual level. They can go ahead and, really automate things that they need to at a very clinical level. So when they ask for multi-tracks, that's exactly what they mean. They essentially want it to where they can drag all of this in, and it'll kind of be a one-to-one copy of your session that you're working in. Now, if they ask for stems, say you're getting a remix done, or an artist needs to, create backing tracks, or you're hiring somebody for stem mastering, stems are essentially entire groups of audio, right? So a stem track and a group track, to me, I kind of think about the same way in terms of my sessions. So every session, I'll have these folders that are color coordinated. I've talked about my kind of project template. And as a producer and a mixing engineer, I kind of break things down into like drums, effect sounds, bass, synth and keys, guitars, lead vocals, background vocals, harmonies, etc. And every single one of those will have a color that I can see, but they also, more importantly, have a group track. So if somebody asks for a drum stem, they essentially want all of my drum sound. So I'm just going to send them this. And you can set it up in your project where you essentially have your groups that you can just export as stems. I'll kind of show you that later when we actually export some files and prep them for a delivery. But if somebody's asking for stems, that's what they mean. They want a drum stem, a synth stem, a vocal stem, a guitar stem, and then it has all of the little kind of subtracks baked into that. Because again, if I'm doing a remix, I kind of just want all the vocals there. I don't really want to go ahead and have 70 different vocal tracks. Maybe I just want the lead vocal stem, I want background vocal stems, and I want harmony stems. And that's good. That's all I need. So keep in mind when you're prepping a project, do they want stems or do they want multi-tracks? Because they are not quite the same thing. Now let's go through and let's actually talk about what shape your file should be in when you deliver them, right? So this is the session that we would be exporting our files from. And it's just a production session that I'm working on. So let's just say hypothetically, I'm sending this out to a mix engineer. This is what my session looks like. One of the biggest things that I see a lot of people do is, instead of actually printing and rendering out their stems or their multi-tracks, what they'll do is they'll just kind of take their audio folder and then send me that. Let me show you what that looks like. So one of the main issues that I see is when they do something like, open up their audio folder for their session and they think, oh, I have a folder named audio. I can probably just send this to the next engineer and producer. So then they send me this whole folder and then I drag things in. There are several different issues that happen with this, or just with files that I get in general, that you should really make sure that you're not doing. Because if you are, they're probably going to turn everybody that may be working on your project in the future completely off of it. So I just dragged in all of that stuff that I might be sent in a folder for the session, right? So let's say now I'm the mixing engineer and I just drag all these files in. The issue that I first see is that nothing is actually zeroed out. Like everything is starting at the beginning of the project because they essentially just sent me a bunch of individual audio clips. Nothing is an actual multi-track, nothing is an actual stem. These are essentially just little bits and pieces that if I go to my original session are kind of organized throughout there. But this is not going to be organized if I drag it into a new session or I drag it into Pro Tools. So if you send audio, please make sure that you actually export it and please make sure that you actually render it out so they all start at 0. Because this to me is completely unworkable. Let me show you a quick example of what it looks like if they're all zeroed out. So let me open up this. We're going to go through this all in a little while, but let's go ahead and just drag in all of our background vocals. And you'll see what the difference is versus having all of these little kind of bits and pieces of audio that are completely random. This is what your stems and multi-tracks should look like. They should all start at the 1. They should all be lined up. They should all last the entire length of the song because you set a project marker and everything that happens in between the start and in between the end all comes out as one file. So make sure that your files are all zeroed out because if I get files that are not zeroed, I'm probably going to either just turn down the project in general because it has completely ruined my workflow, or I'm significantly going to have to push it back because I'm not going to sit there and try to piece together 70 different lead vocal takes to figure out which one was your lead, which one was a duplicate. I'm not doing that. So make sure that they're all zeroed out. Otherwise, people are probably going to be pretty pissed. Now, the second issue that I want to show you on this is nothing is actually named. So this happens a lot when I get files, even if they are completely zeroed out. A lot of the time, it'll just say audio 1, audio 2, audio 3, or it'll say BIP 1, BIP 2, BIP 3, or they'll just, kind of be these weird descriptors of like vocal 1, vocal 2, vocal 3. And to me, that kind of ruins my workflow. That's not what I'm looking to do. So when I get files, let me show you exactly how I like to send them and how I really prefer to receive them. So we're back into my project that I'm the hypothetical producer of, and this is how I'm going to name everything to send it off to another producer or a mixing engineer. And if I am the producer or the mixing engineer who's being hired later, this is my preferred naming scheme. At the end of the day, you just want something that is easy for somebody to understand, that they could open up your session, have all of your files kind of grouped together. So when I'm going through a naming convention, I typically will do a little abbreviation for the type of track it is. So DR is drum, effects is an effects track, BA is bass, SYN is synth, KEY is key, GTR is guitar, VO is vocal, BGV is background vocal, VOFX is vocal effects. So I will essentially start with a naming convention so they at least know right off the bat all of the drums that they're going to get as multi-tracks are all grouped together. They can drag that into their drum folder. They can drag in all of their effects to their effects bus, whatever they want to do. So after I kind of have that signifier, I try to just say exactly what it is. So kick, snare, snare accent, granular ear candy 1, granular ear candy 2, right vocal 1.2, right vocal 1.3. Essentially, it should just be where if I pull up the folder of these, I can look at it and know exactly what a track is, right? So I open up a multis folder right here. Oh, here's their drums, here's their kick, I can drag in their kick. Oh, here's their synth, this is an E piano, I can drag that straight in. Because now what you can do is you can highlight all of these if you're the engineer or you're the producer that's getting sent these files, and you can essentially just drag in a whole group of files at once exactly where you like them in your session, because everybody's going to set their stuff up different. So it really helps. Like this little signifier right here takes 30 seconds to add for all of your tracks, and it can save somebody 15 to 20 minutes of actually setting up a session, because sometimes people will just send, kick, snare, and it doesn't have this. And so now if I'm dragging everything in alphabetical order, I have to go through and I have to kind of rearrange every single track where, okay, now I have to pull the kick up to my drum bus. Now I have to pull the hi-hat up to my drum bus. Now I have to pull my E piano down to my synth bus. So just, if you can, have some kind of signifier like that and have some kind of descriptor. So signifier drum, descriptor kick. Signifier effects, descriptor exhaust hit. It will save somebody so much time. And it's one of the things that when I get sent files and I see that they're named like that, I appreciate it so much because I can mix prep their entire project in less than 5 minutes. Where if I just get sent everything and it doesn't have these, it takes 35 to 40 minutes of setting things up, especially if there's going to be, 100 to 200 tracks. Now, the next thing that is absolutely non-negotiable is that when you're sending somebody multi-tracks or when you're sending somebody stems, make sure that you're not actually clipping on your export, because what happens in a DAW is there's essentially infinite headroom in this, right? So as long as I have a limiter on my master over here, nothing's going to clip coming out of Cubase as long as it's running through this final chain right here. However, when you print your multitracks and when you print your stems, a lot of the time you're not printing that final limiter on there. So if you have something like this kick track, and let's go ahead and let's just see. Okay, so right now I'm -2. That's not going to clip. However, if this was really loud, like if this was all the way up here, brace your ears, it's going to be loud. Now I'm +2. What's going to happen is that when I send that out, it's actually going to clip because it clipped on the way out of my DAW. So now when the next engineer or when the next producer drags it in, that kick is going to have that clipping, it's going to have that distortion, it's going to have that kind of crushed effect. And unless you're going for that specifically, you probably want to avoid that. So just give everything a quick once over and make sure that nothing is actually peaking above 0. Or if it is, at least make sure that it's being routed and then printed through something like a group track where it's bringing it down 5 dB. Essentially, just make sure that if you were to print it and drag it into another session, nothing hits at least at 0. I prefer for everything to at least have a couple dB of headroom, so then, the next person can clip gain it up or down however they like. But as long as nothing's peaking, when I receive files, I don't really care what the volume is because I'm going to go ahead and rebalance them all out anyway. So just make sure that you don't clip, make sure that you don't peak, because that is kind of a non-negotiable. One thing that I will say is there is a quick little trick that can kind of solve that. And if you render it down in 32-bit float or 64-bit float, they are much bigger files, but they essentially also have infinite headroom. So even if I were to, have that kick at +2 coming out of my DAW, so it's gonna, naturally clip, at 32-bit float, I can still take that audio file later and I can clip gain that down because all that headroom is baked in. But if you export at 24-bit, which is the most common, or 16-bit, which is still common but not really preferred by anybody, as soon as that clips, it's done. There is no way to go back. So if you can, always try to export at 32-bit float, especially if you're sending it to mixing. And then other than that, if you can, also make sure that, all of your levels are decent coming out. You don't want anything to be clipping. You don't want anything to be nasty and gross. Another quick one that I don't see a lot of people do, but I really prefer this, is make sure that you just clean up your audio files. Make sure that things are crossfaded, because like right here, if this doesn't have a crossfade, there's going to be a little click and a pop. And when somebody goes to mix this project, they're going to hear all the little clicks and pops between, your vocal comps and your guitar comps. So if you don't have any of these, it's going to sound, you're going to get a bunch of those little things that they're going to eventually have to try to take out with something like RX or something like Spectra layers. And so if you can just make sure that all of your stuff is crossfaded, make sure that you remove any breaths that you don't want, make sure that you remove any background noise that you don't want, essentially prep the file so when they go to the next producer or the next engineer, they are in the exact shape that you would prefer them to be in a final mix. So it's not really the engineer's job to remove all that extra unnecessary noise. That should all be done in the kind of mix prep session. So make sure that everything's crossfaded. Make sure that you delete weird, unwanted noises. The next thing is make sure that you delete any tracks that you don't want going to another producer. I've gotten so many, folders for producing and for mixing where I drag things in and I'm hearing layers that I didn't hear in the demo. And then when I ask the artist about it, they're like, oh, that should have been muted. I actually haven't used that since like an early version. Or vice versa, I get a bunch of empty tracks that then I have to say, hey, is, synth bubbly left? Is that not supposed to have audio on it? Because right now it's blank. And then they'll say, oh, I muted that. I actually don't want that in the session. So before you go ahead and before you start exporting anything and sending out all of your files, just go through, like, these don't have anything on them. This one's muted. I'm just going to right click. I'm going to remove those. I don't need those. I'm going to go down here to my early mixes. I'm going to remove those. I don't need those. I'm going to go to, drum parallel right here. I don't have a source. I don't need that. I'm going to remove that. So now when I go ahead and I start kind of rendering out all of these files, the mixing engineer or the next producer is not going to get empty tracks. They're not going to get a bunch of things that, have layers that don't actually need to be in the song. You shouldn't be making the next producer or the next mixing engineer guess on what you want left and what you want added. So go ahead and, clean up your session before you start exporting. Now, the last thing that I'll say in the file delivery guidelines is this is not necessary, but I think that it does help. And it's including what I like to call a project info guideline. So if I open one right here, here's a quick little example. I always like to send these if I'm hiring out for mixing. And when somebody sends me these, if I'm working on their song, it just really, really helps. But I would put the artist name, I would put the song name, the BPM. I don't have the key here, but I could easily add that real quick. And then I'm going to put the sample rate that the project was recorded in. I'm going to put the bit depth that I am exporting all of the files in. And then I'm going to add some notes. So, when you send something off to producing or to mixing, unless you go ahead and you print it through every single bus and every single group and every single effects chain all the way down, there's going to be steps that might get left off. And so I don't really mind that if I'm working on somebody's project, as long as they tell me. So like I would say, hey, I printed all of these multi-tracks with all of the inserts, but they don't have any of the bus or group processing. So if you want to hear some of that automation and processing, you can go to the stems folder. So then you can kind of hear, how something might open up in a chorus versus close in a verse. And then I say, the main thing that needs to be recreated on your end would be some volume and filter automation on drums, guitar, synth, and keys. They filter out in the verse, swell up into the chorus where they're full volume. And then I also say I have some mix bus processing in the demo that you have, subtle compression, multiband compression, and saturation. And there is also muting going on for all of the instruments right before the chorus so they feel huge. Because those are things that, if I look right here, my bass bus ends up automating down. I have a filter right here where it is kind of automating up through the chorus and through the verse. So unless I am able to print the stems through, my bus individually, that's not going to be baked in. So if you just do multi-tracks and somebody has this drum, it's not going to have any of this group, compression, saturation, anything that is on that group channel, including the automation. So make sure that if it's not going to be processed through this drum bus, you at least let them know in some kind of note what they might need to recreate on their end. But if you really want to go the extra mile, you can process it through the drum bus. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that in 1 second. But before we do, I just want to talk about a couple things that mixing engineers and producers actually probably want, because I've seen so many times where somebody hires me to mix a song, they send me a demo, and the demo sounds great, and I know exactly where I want to take it, and then I get the files from them, and it sounds nothing like the demo, and it's because they've taken off everything on their vocal chain, they've removed all the plugins from their synth, everything is completely dry, and if you're hiring a mixing engineer, their job is not to go and recreate every single thing that you've done, right? They don't need to go in and they don't need to figure out what reverb you had on your plucky synth. They don't need to figure out what guitar tone you had on your chorus guitar. They don't need to figure out what kick drum you had. So when you send files, obviously talk to the mixing engineer or the producer that you're hiring, but see what state they want them in. Because if I'm getting hired to mix and then I get all of their files that are completely dry, no sounds are committed, nothing is actually panned in their session, and when I load it up, it's not close to a one-to-one copy of the demo that I heard, I'm going to be annoyed because I'm not starting at the same place that I was prepared to start from, and now I have to go in and I have to recreate things, and I spend a lot of time recreating things that were fine in the first place, and that's time that I could instead spend on really finessing a song, really tweaking things, really getting the feeling of a song right. So when you send something out for mixing, talk to your mix engineer, because some people might prefer dry, but I think 95% of mix engineers are probably going to want things that are committed. They're going to want all the tones that you have. They're going to want all of the effects you have. And if they need something later, like, let's say I want a dry lead vocal so I can do the lead vocal processing, I'll just ask for that on a one-to-one basis, right? So if I need a synth and I don't like the effect that you put on it, I'll just say, hey, can you send me this synth multi-track? And I want to try a different processing. And that's fine. I don't think you need to send everything dry. I think that's going to add hours and hours to a mixing engineer or producer's job in the future. And, if there's something that you like the idea of, but you felt like you couldn't execute, then have that communication. If you're like, hey, I like the idea of this really crushed drum sound in the bridge, so I'm going to include mine as a reference, but I'm also going to include a dry one. So if you want to try to recreate that, I think you could do that idea, but better. Have a conversation, have communication. Your mixing engineer should know exactly what to expect, and you should deliver exactly what they're expecting. Okay, now let's do the last thing, and that's where I'm actually going to show you how to render out all of these stems and multi-tracks, and then what they'll look like in a folder, and then what they'll sound like when you load them into a new session. So here is everything that we have. We went over the naming conventions. So essentially, when you're exporting your files, you want to make sure that you add your markers in your DAW. So I'm going to start everything right here, a quarter bar before, because there's kind of a little ramp up. And then I'm going to end it right over here. So everything that's in this kind of medium blue right here is going to be what ends up in my multi-tracks and in my stems. So once you set that project marker, you can go ahead and you can open up your export tab. Every DAW is a little bit different, but they all kind of work the same, I think. And what you're going to do is create a folder. So Austin Hole 3-minute multis and stems. You create your folder. And then for multis and stems, what I like to do is just kind of go ahead and start exporting. So you go to multiple right here. And then for group channels, those are my stems. And then for my effects channels, my instrument channels, and my audio channels, those are going to be all of my multi-tracks. And you can, deselect things that you might not want in there. Like I have some of my Juno routing. They don't need that. They don't need, some of my output channels. They don't need some of these unused groups. So you go ahead and make sure that you get everything exactly how you want it. Your naming convention is all there. If you prefer to do things like if you prefer to have a channel number, you can add that. I don't like it. I just feel like it adds a lot of text that doesn't need to be there. You can add your channel type. Again, I don't add that. With my naming convention, they should know exactly what they're getting. So then you say, okay. Now, the next thing that you want to do is you want to select the right sample rate and bit depth. I always just bounce at whatever the project was recorded and produced in. So this one was 44.1 kilohertz. At the end, if you need to upsample something in mastering to go to a 48 kilohertz video distribution, you can always do that later. But just make sure that you're rendering this in the exact format that you recorded it in, and then make sure that the next engineer knows what that is. Because if I get 48K files and I'm in a 44.1 session, it's going to warp them, it's going to distort them. So I just need to kind of know that ahead of time. Next thing is that bit depth, which we talked a little bit about earlier. If you can do 32-bit float, you're going to get more headroom. You'll probably prevent some clipping and some aliasing. So I highly, highly recommend doing that. And then once you do that, this is where it really matters of what your next producer or mixing engineer wants, right? So this is the level of effects that you can leave on. So most times I'm doing inserts and strip, unless I have some insane group and bus processing that I really want baked in which case I can process it through my groups and sends. So I'll do that a lot when I'm sending artists like backing tracks or if I'm sending something to a remixer, because that's going to make it literally a one-for-one copy of what's in my session. The bad part about that is that it will do it in what's called a real-time bounce. So if I have 80 tracks in my session, it's essentially going to play my 3.5-minute song 80 times while it exports. So it will take a couple hours because it is actively rendering every single effect on every single channel all the way through my chain in real time. But if I do this at the end of a workday, I can set this, leave for the day, come back tomorrow, all of my stuff is printed. You can do the same thing even going through your master bus or your mix bus. Or you can do completely dry, which unless I ask for, I'm probably never really doing. So just make sure that you select the level of effects and processing that you want. And then after, you can create a new project, create a new track, or do nothing. I always just have it to do nothing. And then you can go ahead and you can hit your export. So once you export, everything will come into that big folder. And then here is kind of what I like to deliver / what I like to receive when I'm being given files. So here's my folder. I have a reference right here that is exactly the final version that I have of the song with everything I have. I have the project info sheet we just talked about. And then I have the multis right here. So those are going to be all of my individual tracks. And then I have my stems right here, which are going to be all of my group tracks. And when you take those into a session and you drag them in, they should be pretty close to what I have. So, if I take off some of my mastering, here's what it sounds like. Now, I'll open up a session where I drag in all of the brand new sims and multis. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and just drag these into my session. We're going to go ahead and have different tracks. And this is what I mean by everything is zeroed out. When I drag them up to the front, my entire structure stays the same. I can go ahead, highlight everything. I can pop those right into my drum bus because that's my drums. I can do the same thing with effects tracks. So let's go here. Let's drag all of these into effects. And I actually dragged them to the wrong place, so they're colored wrong, but it is what it is. So I'll just put them in my effects folder. Let's route those. And then you do the same thing with every little group that you have, right? So I have my drums, my effects, I have bass, I have synths, I have guitars, I have vocals, harmonies, and some of my vocal effects and synths and stuff like that. So as you can see, everything starts at the same time. Everything is labeled. Nothing is even close to clipping. Everything looks pretty good. So let's actually go to a chorus and let's hear what it sounds like. Everything has the effects baked in. Again, there's some of that mix bus processing and some of those big kind of group processing tweaks that are not printed onto here because I didn't do that. But that's fine. Those are things that the mixing engineer is going to do anyway. So, I told them I needed the automation. This is how, when I drag somebody's files in, this is how they should look to me. Whether I'm producing it or mixing it, etc., it should all be set up like this. So hopefully this video helped you kind of understand how you should set up files to send them to production and mixing, or if you're a producer or a mixing engineer, what exactly to ask for to make your job a little bit easier. Because the more organized the project is, the more cohesive all of the tracks are, the smoother it's going to go. Again, you don't want to derail a project right off the bat because, you know, you send somebody stems or you send somebody multi-tracks and they get them and they sound garbage, they look garbage, they, you know, just are unorganized. Don't do it. It takes 20 minutes to prep an entire session to send off to your mixing engineer or the next producer. So take the time, do it, print out all your files. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you like it. Make sure that you subscribe because we have videos like this every single week. And then other than that, head over to our website, makepopmusic.com, where you can check out sample packs, preset packs, MIDI packs, start to finish production course. That is all over there. But that's going to do it for this video. I'll see you guys next time. Much love. Peace.